Everyone in Jesus' world thought holiness was about what you touched, what you ate, and who you stood next to. But Jesus flips the purity system on its head and says the real danger isn't outside a person, but in the heart. We're diving into Mark chapter 7, verses 17 through 23. Let's look at verse 17 from the English Standard Version of the Bible. And when he had entered the house and left the people, his disciples asked him about the parable. When did this happen? Right after the Pharisees and scribes from Jerusalem were criticizing the disciples for not practicing the traditional hand-washing before eating. Jesus told them they had let God's commandments go in favor of human traditions. Then Jesus turned to the crowd and told them that real defilement doesn't come from contact with people and things, but from within a person. Now, Mark tells us that Jesus and the close disciples entered a house and left the crowd behind, and they asked him about the parable. What parable? When Jesus said, "It's not the things outside you that defile you, rather the things inside you." This sounds a lot like Mark chapter 4, verse 10. Again, the disciples wait until they're alone with Jesus and reveal that they didn't understand what he said to the crowd. Mark wants us to know that the insiders are still not understanding clearly and need remedial instruction from the Master. Let's move on to verses 18 and 19. And he said to them, "Then are you also without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile him, since it enters not his heart, but his stomach, and is expelled?" Thus he declared all foods clean. Look at what Jesus asked them. Are you also without understanding? That implies there are others without understanding. Of whom is Jesus speaking? Surely the Pharisees and scribes who prompted all this defilement talk. It seems that the disciples have no better grasp of the issue than their critics. So Jesus breaks it down in very practical detail for them. When the disciples ate without ritually washing their hands, even if they had touched something ceremonially unclean, and consumed some tiny particle of it, the particle would go with the food to the stomach, not the heart, and would eventually be expelled as waste. It would pass through the person and not contaminate. This very earthy description reiterates Jesus' point that real defilement is a matter of the heart and character, rather than a matter of what you touch or taste. Then, Mark makes a bold doctrinal statement. Thus, he declared all foods clean. This is an earth-shaking claim that demands careful consideration. First, if you carefully reread verses 18 and 19, it is undeniable that no such declaration by Jesus is recorded. Second, it's also undeniable that Mark is extrapolating a conclusion from Jesus' statements about the real source of defilement. Third, a declaration that all foods are clean would be a direct repudiation of the dietary laws established in the book of Leviticus, and would mean that Jesus was teaching Jews to ignore the Torah, which Jesus himself said he was not here to do. So what do we make of this extraordinary claim by Mark? Mark wrote this after Jesus had completed his ministry, gone to the cross, rose from the dead, and ascended to heaven. So what? By the time of his writing, the apostles, including Peter, who influenced Mark, were teaching that Jesus didn't do away with the law. Rather, he fulfilled every aspect of God's law. So we can look at Mark's parenthetical statement as supplying information that wouldn't have been clear at the time Jesus was talking to the disciples about defilement. But it was understood that way by Mark when he was writing. Why does this matter? Because if Jesus had been teaching Jews that they could ignore the Torah and eat foods that are forbidden in Leviticus, he would have been rightly characterized as speaking against God's law. But not so after the cross, when he had fulfilled God's law. That's a pretty big deal, isn't it? Let me know what you think in the comments. Let's move on to verse 20, and he said, "What comes out of a person is what defiles him." Where do defiling things come from? Not from outside a person, not from bumping into a Gentile, not from a dish not being ritually purified. Truly defiling things, things that separate a person from God, originate inside the person. If I become unclean or impure, It is because of what's already inside my heart, mind, and character. This is the thesis of Jesus' teaching. Next, the supporting evidence for his thesis. Look at verses 21 to 22. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. Jesus shares what theologians call a vice list. These are the things that genuinely defile people, and if you look at the list, you can't accidentally or intentionally eat any of them. If the disciples, or anyone else, were to practice the ritual washings that were the traditions of the elders, it would in no way protect them from the things on this list. Then Jesus drives home his point with verse 23. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. The vice list and the summary statement show that Jesus' approach is exactly the opposite of the Pharisees and the scribes. They are carefully guarding against risks that are outside themselves, people, places, and things. But Jesus lists things that come from within a person, matters of the heart that, if allowed to persist, will genuinely defile a person. What defiles? Not food, not dirty hands, not contact with unclean objects or people, not even failure to follow religious traditions, but the heart's own output. The lessons of this passage seem self-contained, but why is this passage important for Mark as a writer and for his gospel as an evangelistic document? Because the next story that Mark chronicles is the story of a Gentile woman who comes to Jesus for help for her daughter. The story is remarkable because of the things Jesus and the woman say to each other, but also because it makes a huge statement about humans being clean or unclean. It shows the gospel moving beyond Judaism to all people. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching So What Scripture. Please share with your friends.